Welcome back, viewers, to this new episode of the Shillong Reading Room. And today we're having another shoot for the 2026, so Happy New Year to all of you who are joining us also. And today we're going to talk about this book, Reworking Culture, Relatedness, Rites, and Resources in Garo Hills, Northeast India. And this book is written by Professor Erik de Maaker, who is here with us here today. And before we go to him, I'd like to introduce him to you. This small bio I got from his website. Erik de Maaker is an associate professor at the Institute of Cultural Anthropology and Development Sociology at Leiden University, Netherlands. He conducts research on the valuations of place and kinship, primarily in South Asia. He works on themes such as religion, ethnicity, kinship, migration, environment, knowledge, heritage, materiality, visuality, personhood, and the life cycle. He has published extensively on the highlands of Eastern South Asia, focusing particularly on the challenges people face as a result of cultural change and rapid economic development. Thank you, Erik, for being with us here today. And maybe there's something you'd like to add, apart from the bio I have read about you from the university.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me in the program. I'm really honored about that. I have come for the first time to Northeast India when I was a student, which is by now more than 25 years ago. And I think over the years I have been coming back because I connected to people here, people connected to me. I can see how rich this area is in terms of culture and the kind of resources it has, but also the kind of challenges which it encompasses. And I think that it is important that for me as a social scientist, I continue to connect to these kind of issues, and I hope to also inspire other academics to sort of work on these kind of topics, both in my home country, but also certainly here.
Thank you, Erik, for the introduction. I think because the fact that people should know that you've been coming up for a very long time, right? Because this is not the first time you're here. Your book itself is part of the research work you did during your PhD, which I will come to that. One thing is that I heard about you a lot before I met you. I heard your name, but I never knew who the person was. So it's so great to actually finally meet you after so many years. And one other thing also, when I was in the university, so we had geography department here, anthropology down there. There I watched a documentary on the man capture. And it seems like it was your partner who made this, Nandini Bedi, right?
True.
So can you tell us something about that documentary? What was your part in it? How did you help? What was your role in that documentary?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Well, this documentary is really very much her work, but obviously it took place in the context of the research which I was also doing there. So at the time I was a PhD student, and we lived for 2 years in a Garo village. And in that village, which had at that time still, more or less a majority, if not certainly, let's say, half of the population were people who followed the traditional Garo religion. They were Songsareks, and as part of their marriage practice, they would engage in what they call man capture. So the idea would be that first of all, the marriage involves taking a man to the woman rather than a woman to a man, and the idea is basically that a group of young boys, usually affiliated with the bride-to-be, goes to a place where finds a man and captures that man and brings him to his wife, marries him, and then the idea is that he tries to sort of escape from that. And my role in that was that, we were living in that village, and I was very much, it was happening all around us. We tried to understand how does this idea of using force to create a marriage, how does that, how did that materialize, and how do people relate to it psychologically? And the film she made was very much about that. It's very much about what is the psychology behind it. And in my understanding, the notion of capturing, marriage by capturing, means that it is the larger kin group, it is the people around it who basically bring the partners together. And it is a way to avoid, for people who get married, that they might be eager to to be married, and to also they might be eager for what that sort of implies in terms of physical togetherness. So that is basically what we saw it happening all around us, and she tried to understand that, we tried to understand that, and she, being a filmmaker, decided that this was in fact so amazing, that we were part of that, that she made that film.
Because there is a culture of bride capture, right? Other parts of the region, like you have the Kyrgyz, you have the Hmong people in Southeast Asia, right? But here is the man who's being captured, which is so interesting. And I also saw that because in that movie, you remember that there was a woman who was, I think, was husband had passed away or left her, and then she gets a new bridegroom. But in the end, there was also a young girl who was going to her village, to the man's village, to bring him back. So it just seems like who chooses whom, who decides to stay back. It's a very, like, I mean, the motivations are very different, right? I mean, like, so what did you saw in that movie? What are the motivations you saw while you were there for people?
I think that to some extent, at least at the time when we were there, this whole idea of capture and the use of force there was a strong element of play in it. So it's not just about forcing physically, as in using physical force, but it's also in sort of using force or as a way of sort of, well, almost as a kind of invitation. Mm-hmm. And there was also this idea of that the man who is captured, that he basically had to try to escape, which he usually succeeded in doing, because if he would not try to escape, it would show that he was eager to get the particular girl, which is something that is shameful. So there's this play on honor, shame, on also maybe gauging, do I want this relationship, yes or no, which is all very, very interesting. And indeed, women play a role there in the sense that it's also up to them. I mean, basically, I think what also the film shows is that it is women who are young girls who basically tell their brothers and cousins, please go and catch that man for me, right? And yeah, it was that kind of play.
I mean, very like ritualistic in that sense. And I think I'd like to ask you about, because you also, in your book, you talked about how you recorded, right? So many of the conversation you had with the community members, you use your camera a lot out there.
True.
So in that sense, I want to understand, how do you look at ethnographic filmmaking and anthropological writing coming together? Because that is something you do, I think.
Well, I think that's an amazing question. Thank you so much for that question. And it's something that I indeed have sort of worked with, but also struggled with, in the sense that I think that, okay, let's go to this particular research project, in what much of the research which Reworking Culture is based on. Funerals were in fact very important, because funerals are events which are really very crucial in a particular context, in a Garo context, still until today, but also in a particular village context, as events where people really come together, and where it's also mandatory to come together, and where it's mandatory to show that your affection for each other, to show that you're connected, to show the relationships that you trace, and to also not only show relationships to the living, but also your relationship to the dead, and your responsibility towards the person who has sort of passed. And there, in the context of these funerals, the way in which people interact with one another, but also the kind of things they say to each other, are highly, it's very complicated language, and it's very complicated interactions. And I was attending these events, and I just couldn't make head or tail of them, which of course also has to do with the fact that I'm an outsider, I'm a foreigner, I speak a certain degree of Garo, but when it comes to complicated interactions, that's something which I can't follow. So I used there the video very much as as a way to register these kind of interactions, also register the way people speak, and then analyze it afterwards. So in my understanding, in fact, in a Garo context, it's fundamentally an oral culture. Yes, there are many people who are literate. Yes, there are many people who read and write. But the art and the literature is in orality. It's in how people speak, and it's the art of speaking. But when people start to speak literary Garo, they start to use all sorts of words and terms, which they, for instance, call kujikche, which means a kind of twinning of terms, which really is high art. And even if I did a lot of the field work, I was supported by people from Tura who came and who were very good in Garo and English. But even when they just listened to these conversations, they couldn't make head or tail. They didn't understand what they were trying to say. So I needed that video in order to be able to get into these kind of conversations and understand what people were talking about. The way they negotiated the relationships among each other, the way they practice and talk about the replacement of deceased people, the way they talk about the obligations which the different kin groups have towards each other, that kind of thing. And I think that so for me that has been really crucial, and I would have not been able to write this book without that as a kind of, to provide the kind of basic ethnographic insights. At the same time, I think that there's a huge value to making visual ethnographies, which is what my partner did, indeed. Yeah. I have not done it, and I must say that when I wrote, in fact, many years ago when I wrote my PhD, I tried to sort of include some of those conversations into it, and I also made like a DVD which came with the PhD, and I remember that every time when I try to use it, and also when I try to use it in class, I get the feeling that it's too complicated. I just can't bring it across. It's like the density of the kind of cultural context that you require to understand what people are doing is just huge.
Because when you shoot someone, right, because you talked about you want to be able to capture all the complexity that you want to. I mean, especially at that moment of time when things are happening and you don't understand the language, sometimes let's say they use certain terms where even the translator is finding it difficult. But also when you have a camera and you're trying to shoot someone, right, there is a consciousness also that comes into the other person you're being shot. So how did you make sure that for them to become comfortable with you being there, not just but also with a camera?
Yeah, I guess that's another excellent question. I think that what we did at the time was basically I've been living there, so we basically set up. We were invited to come to this particular village, Sadopara, which is also mentioned in the book, well, we basically, people said, okay, there's a place where you can stay, and we created another small place to stay, and then we basically set up a household there. And because we were there all the time, we were there in the mornings, we were there in the evenings, but also in the daytime, and people used to drop in, and there was always like endless cups of teas and endless talk. And that was in fact how I learned a lot of my Garo, because it was in those daily interactions. And then at one moment I started with recording things, and I started with recording stuff which I knew, or I presumed at that time, would sort of be uncontroversial, like fishing and agricultural stuff and so on. And then at a certain moment, when it dawned upon people that I was interested in how they were like interacting with one another in relation to, kinship, meaning relatedness, also in the context of these funerals, they sort of started to invite me to attend those things. And then when we sort of worked with the material, we basically had a kind of, we had a kind of open room. People would just drop in there, come and sit with us, see the video. Okay. They saw what was going on. And that way also, I think I could explain myself, saying that I'm interested in your, I always said I'm interested in Niam and Dakbewal.
Yeah, we'll talk about that, Niam.
Niam as a kind of a core term in terms of, what custom implies here, and how custom is something that is being sort of formulated all the time. and Dagbeewal as something that maybe stands for the term culture, and those. I think that somehow helped to explain myself and allow people to make me part of it. And then they also started to invite us, for instance, for things like, there are ways to settle disputes. And, that's the kind of thing which is also very much part of the kind of village context in which we live. And I think it's still happening in that particular way. And sometimes these things also turn ugly with people, being beaten up. Or
you mentioned somebody getting beaten up in front of you.
Yeah, and in fact, that is like, and people get beaten up by their own relatives because they put shame on their clan. Like, it's like you don't. It's not others. It's not from the other side. It's your own. It's your own relative. So these ideas about, what is good behavior. That becomes very clear in those contexts. So I guess that gradually we basically build that relationship like that.
And that's how they become very comfortable with you. They're able to open up. And then once the footage is in, then you also allow them to come and watch the footage and maybe help interpret a little bit, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but I must say that there was also a selectivity, and I did not in all cases, because there's one case which is quoted in the book where an elderly man was really beaten up in a very bad way. I attended that, and then later on people came to me and said, "Oh, now we want to see how that guy was beaten up." And I said, "Sorry, the footage is not available." That because I thought this is not nice for him. This is humiliating for him. This is I didn't know what to do with that. But then later on, when I wrote the book, I decided that the case itself was really it's very revealing. Again, because in fact, the reason why that conflict happened and what it was about was something so very different from what I had imagined. It was really about the fact that he put shame on his own family, the reason why they reacted like that to him. And I put it in a book in an anonymized manner. So I changed all the names, and I did that in fact. So in the book, some real names are being used for people who want to be acknowledged. But when things were not good and when people were vulnerable, I decided to anonymize.
I think you did mention that in your introduction also, right? Some places you have used real name, some places you have changed the name, because also in your book, you also talked about your work is not about salvage anthropology, right? So can you tell us something about what is salvage anthropology and how your work, this book in particular, is different than that?
Thank you for that question. Well, salvage anthropology, in my understanding, is that we would study traditional cultures, or what we call traditional cultures, because they're going to disappear. And that could be a very good reason, or that's often an argument, like why we want to study tribal culture or cultures in the Northeast, which are places which modernize and where traditions are vanishing. But my perspective has been a different one. I was interested, in fact, in how 150 years after, let's say, Christianity came to Garo Hills and became such a phenomenal force in the sense that it basically captured, in an ethnic and cultural sense, almost all of the Garo, community, how particular groups of people continue to resist that, and what are their reasons for doing so. And that also means that I think it allowed me to look much more at continuity. I think that, now how do I say this?
You're not trying to save things. You're not trying to save something.
I think that if we do salvage anthropology, we suggest that the people who we're looking at, that they are somehow from a past and they're going to vanish.
Okay.
What I'm trying to what I'm trying to do with the work is to show that what they're doing today is they are our contemporaries. They live with us, and they do this in the now, and they want to do it. They make a conscious choice to conduct their lives and to organize their lives in the way they want to do that. And I think that is something that we should honor and basically, value. Also, I think that what plays out in Garo Hills to some extent is that some of the histories which have been sort of written, they sort of emphasize a kind of missionary perspective, where the presumption is that when, at one moment, people in Garo Hills, when Christianity came, that was a kind of, it sort of made history start again. And I think that that's problematic. I think we have to look at continuities rather than at, thinking that, that's the past and now we're in a kind of modern sort of stage.
I think, and in fact, your book talks about that because, in terms of, let's say, I'll come to that a little bit later, but because I have a couple of questions before we go into that part, the continuity part, right? First of all, Sadolpara, the focus of your book. And Sadolpara is very famous now. I mean, we had an IFAD project many years ago. I remember since that time we've been hearing about Sadolpara. Were you part of the IFAD project or were you somehow connected to it? Because it seems like in the last 10 years, I mean, after your work has come out, it has become very famous. So what is how did you get to Sadolpara in the first place and what happened after that? That became so famous.
Well, I don't really know. Okay, so when we came there, the reason why I ended up in Sadolpara was the fact that it's a very large village territory. It's a very large village, and I decided that for the kind of research which I wanted to do, I needed to be in one place. But then it had to be somehow a substantial village, otherwise it wouldn't work out. And this one had, at that time that we came to live there were like 1,600 inhabitants, so that's large. In fact, at that moment, the many development initiatives which are there now in Meghalaya had not yet taken off in that particular way. And people were also, maybe because they had so much land, they were, I think, much more than in other parts of West Garo Hills, they were still relying on shifting cultivation. And in fact, the family with whom I associated most, who adopted me, for them shifting cultivation was at that time really like their main source of livelihood. After we left at a certain moment, indeed IFAD had started in the early 2000s and started at one moment also came to Sadolpara and started to its various development projects. And from what I understood, but that's from the IFAD side, in fact they had difficulties in Sadolpara, maybe because it was a large village and because there were also a kind of long-running issues and conflicts among people in the village, which made it complicated to run, for instance, self-help groups and so on. Yes, and I guess that the way it goes is that okay, we stayed there for 2 years. I have been coming back. I've been writing about Sadolpara. I think that maybe, well, I don't want to say that. Too much about that, but I do think that the fact that I was there was at that time a lot of talk about people saying that, maybe we should just give up on being Songsarex and we should just convert. And I said, why do you want to convert? I mean, there's nothing wrong with being Songsarek. And I think that maybe the kind of attention that came from us helped getting something in motion where they felt acknowledged and they felt that maybe it's okay to be Songsarek in the 21st century. Maybe it's not that we are that is just something from the past. And they also became acknowledged from the government side, which is of course for instance they went to at one moment in I think 2009 there was like Asian Games. What was Asian Games in Delhi?
Asian
right?
Games?
No, it was
Asian Games.
There was the Commonwealth Games.
Commonwealth Games.
And there was this famous composer, now whose name I can't remember. A.R. Rahman.
Yeah.
He organized like something with drums from all over Asia. There were people from Sadolpara there who brought their Dhamma and who became part of that. So which gave many of them for the first time the occasion to go to Delhi. They went to Dhaka to perform their Wangala there. So they got a kind of acknowledgement for the fact that, hey, as Songsareks, we are valued. And I think that, you know, in a kind of more general sense, there is a very double relationship, I think, within Garo Hills towards the traditional religion, in the sense that on the one hand, Christianity is extremely important in Garo Hills, and I mean there is no doubt about how central it is to, you know, to, let's say, Garo ethnicity. But there's also something about what was the cultural basis of our grandparents? Mm-hmm. What happened in the last 100 years? Mm-hmm. And that is, I think, increasingly receiving appreciation. And these people in Sadopera are somehow flag bearers of all that.
Okay. So in a way you can say like you came at a very important time when things were changing a little bit. Maybe people have thought maybe we should, you know, like give up on tradition and maybe become like the rest of our community, what have they, like conversion. But so in a way I think you have staved off that eventuality. I hope it's not an eventuality. And in this book you also talk about Gigi, your adopted right. mother, because Sadopera, I think you were staying near her house, you built your house near her house. So can you tell us something about her, because you also dedicated a book to her, right?
Yeah, she was I think a remarkable woman. She was I think she, you know, the reason that we came there at all was basically because she really invited us. It was that really happened in an early stage when we were basically, like getting to know the place, and it was only much later that I understood that for her doing so and inviting me. Was in fact also really a statement within the village, saying that, hey, I as a land-owning house have the right to invite this person, and the village head cannot say no to that. So she also, I think, wanted to make that point. And we have over the years sort of, I mean, yeah, developed a kind of relationship with her. We lived with her household. She would shout at me like I was her son and whatever, call me, do all sorts of things. And I think that was wonderful because it gave me, of course, an adoptive family. You know, maybe in hindsight, I also think that you know, the only way in which a village, like in this kind of a village, everybody is in a way a relative of one another. People are either matrilineal relatives or their in-laws, because you're thinking all the time about larger clans. But it also means that in many ways the idea of having people who live there who are not somehow considered a relative is a very complicated one. So maybe bringing me in and bringing us in was the only way to get that done.
Okay, yeah. Because in terms of when you talk about, no, because she's a landowner out there, so right. Even the village head could not say anything about her bringing somebody to stay with her. Now, you also said in the book that she is a kind of a Nokma.
Right.
But then there's also a village head. So True. What's the difference between a Nokma and a village head? Because this is something I think many of our viewers also, who are Garo, even Garo also may not be able, may not know the difference. What is the difference between those two terms?
Yeah, well, I think that's a very important one. Thanks for also flagging that. So in my understanding, and in fact also in the, I mean, not only in my understanding, but the way it works is that there is at the level of the district council, there are, let's say, particular people registered as Nokma. That means this is Garo Hills is a 6 schedule area, and as a 6 schedule area within India, that means there's a lot of leeway for a codified version of customary law to be used to organize basically land management and much more than that, because land management, land ownership, and so on and so forth. At the level of that codification, there is one family which is recognized, one couple which is recognized as the Nokma. But it doesn't mean that at the level of the actual village domains, because we're talking about the actual, like a whole village domain, that there are not also minor landowners. And those minor landowners have historically, in my understanding, also always been there. And she was definitely one of them, but her name is not written with the district council, which means that the kind of claim to land which she has is a kind of claim which is not, it is recognized at the village level, but it's not recognized beyond that. So her struggle and that of her family was very much that we have a claim to this land, we have a claim to particular stretches of forest, but that is not necessarily supported at that higher level.
And you talk about in terms of coming of the state, the state apparatus, how much has influenced it. Now, in the book also you talked about how the Nokma would not share the profit of, let's say, mining or certain thing with, let's say, other members of the same, like, the family of the house, the bigger house which is there. And now in Garo Hills we also hear a lot about Nokma selling of common land. There's a lot of issues out there. So do you think this legal ambiguity, where in the village you have a Nokma, let's say a mine land owner like Gigi, and then you have people who have been accepted by the district council to be the Nokma out there. Does that play out? Have you seen it playing out in your work as well, in the book?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I must also say, I mean, the issue you're flagging is a really important one, and it is also one, that is, I think, not often clearly understood, particularly not by outsiders, because people may think that, the Nokma who is registered as the village head by the district council is basically the landowner. But in my understanding, the way it works in Garo Hills is that Nokma can always be no more than a figurehead. It's always about the uncles, the sons, the aunts. It's always about the larger group of people who are around it. And then it is about sort of, indeed, other people who are also have land rights, who are not necessarily registered, but that immediately brings up the issue that when there is something, when a land is being sold, or for instance what is now happening big time in Garo Hills is that there are large motorways being constructed, then land compensation is being paid for by the Highways Commission. That can be about very substantial sums of money. Now that money will be given by such an authority to the one who has the signatory powers, which will be the registered Nokma. But the way in which it works customary is that according to local customary interpretations of that Nokma-ship is that in fact that Nokma is a figurehead, so he should share. It should not just go to this one person. And how sharing is done, to what degree sharing is done, that is a matter of local politics. And I must say that I never got to understand these things apart from the fact, and I think that that's also what I write about, that this is a matter of which creates discontent. It creates fissure. It's a source of conflict. And I think it is something that, I don't know. I mean, I think people are struggling with that.
Because I think certain sections of the book, chapter 3, chapter 4, you did talk about some of these new things coming up. For example, agriculture changing.
Right.
And how changing agriculture is also affecting religion, like Songsarek, right? Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, well, thanks again for bringing that up. The whole, the idea is that at one time the ancestors of the current Garo, that they were all Songsareks, right? Which is what we could say the traditional Garo religion, which is a religious perspective which proceeds from a world in which we have to live as humans with countless spirits, and we have to somehow negotiate life among them. This negotiation of life with the spirits becomes very much evident in the context of shifting cultivation. So shifting cultivation, or as it is called in Northeast India, Jum, is really critical here. And the rituals in relation to shifting cultivation are excessive, and all they start right from the fact that if there is a particular stretch of forest, shifting cultivation means one makes temporary fields in forest, and these fields are then supposedly abandoned after 2 years. That before one makes a field, one goes to the forest, requests like, can I make a field here? Then goes home, has a dream, and dreams whether that's okay or not. So dreams are also crucial. Then when the forest, when the field is being made, when it's planted, the planting is done jointly. Again, the planting involves communication with the spirits. The first harvest involves communication with the spirit. The post-harvest involves communication with the spirit. Garo Vangala, which is in many ways the sort of signature festival and also a state holiday within Meghalaya, right, is a post-harvest festival, but which in the village, let's say the Songtserek context, is basically often referred to as like a thanksgiving to the spirits. I don't think that's the correct term, but so that communication with spirits is crucial in shifting cultivation. But when it comes to other forms of agriculture, somehow the spirits are not part of that, and that is something which is people also have a lot of paddy fields where they have. For paddy fields, shifting the communication with the spirits, as far as I've understood, has never played a role. Now they're moving increasingly towards monocropping of particularly areca nut and cashew nut. Also there it doesn't play a role. How this exactly works is very much, I think it's very interesting, and it's also the kind of things which I'm quite trying to work on in the context of the current research project that we're now doing.
Because because in this book you talk a lot about Songtserek, right? And there are some sections talk about how the relationship with Christianity.
Right.
So it seems like the people are about to become Christian, they were converting, but now it's not missionary activity, but change in agricultural system.
True.
Change in your way of life that may actually reduce the importance of Songtserek. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think there are a number of reasons why like the Songtserek basically practices went into decline, and I think the most important, in fact, is education. I mean, it's a wonderful thing that primary education has spread throughout Garo Hills, but it's somehow a more kind of complicated add-on of that spread of primary education is that it's apparently very difficult to be a Songtserek in the Garo context while you go to school. So one of the first things when you go to school is in fact that then conversion becomes part of that. And that is of course also, I mean, some of the schools are government schools, but there's a lot of schools which are run by either Baptist or Catholic missions, which are often very good schools. So somehow that doesn't gel, that doesn't go together very well. I think another reason why people moved away from being Songtserek is the fact that, and that's also something which I wrote about, is that in the communication, in that relationship with the spirits, which is at the same time, it's a very complicated one, and the spirits are very demanding. And the problem with living in a Songtserek context is that every now and then there are situations in which you are basically forced to make very substantial sacrifices. You have to give a lot. You have to give a lot in terms of animals, cows, goats, whatever, which become part of communicative rituals. You also have to give a lot to your kin group in terms of rice beer, in terms of other things,
beef.
And what it means is that if you are a family which has prestige and which is rich, you're also basically forced to redistribute all the time. And that redistribution can be such that it can basically reduce you to poverty. And that's also what I wrote about, and which in fact I could trace in oral histories and how that happened. And I think that, one of the things which Christianity allows people to do is to somehow become more nuclear in the way they, look at property, about houses, stuff like that. And that affects the kind of sharing mechanism. But that is, I think, attractive. I think Christianity, in a way, of course, the way it also presented itself was that it was a panacea, like a solution against certain demands which the spirits make. So that was maybe also a reason. And of course agriculture plays also a role there.
Because I remember there was a documentary on conversion in Arunachal where there's a woman, She
Right.
was Doni Polo initially, then she became a Christian and said, I became a Christian because it was too expensive. Because then I had to sacrifice to spirits all the time. And I think Garo Hills also played out, but at the same time, you also wrote in this book, although Songsarik and Christian Garo interpret Niyam, which is the way of life, let's say we'll talk about that differently. These distinctions are frequently easily played down to emphasize a shared sense of Garo-ness. So, what is Niyam, first of all, because it's a very important part of your work.
Right.
And how do Christians and Songsarik interpret it? And you are saying, despite that, they still come together to share a sense of Garo-ness. Can you please explain these 3 points?
Yeah, thank you for this question. This is indeed one of the, I think it's a core issue, and it continues also for me to be something which I'm trying to understand. So first of all, Niyam, and the way I understand it, is Niyam is about customary practices, but Niyam is very much about customary practices, but it's very much oral, it's very much lived. And it centers on notions as honor and shame, and what is good behavior, what is bad behavior, what is taboo. And as such, Niyam is something that is not like a written law, even though attempts have been made. Various authors have tried to sort of written about it. Actually, there are quite a few books which attempt to basically codify Niyam. And that's also an ongoing process. But the way in which it is lived, it is very much part of a kind of communication, conversation between people, particularly, I think, senior people, often men, but also women, who find an agreement about what is appropriate behavior in particular context. So that is what's Niyam about, what Niyam is. In a Songsarak context, you can enact Niyam in a particular way. For instance, when it comes to these funerals, one crucial aspect is the replacement of deceased persons. So dependent a bit on the situation you're in, if a senior person dies, particularly if that is from a household which has a lot of assets, then in fact that person will be the relatives of the person who had died have the obligation but also the right to provide another person for the one who has died. So for instance, if I pass away, then my partner has the right to a cousin of mine, but it could also be a younger person, but somebody who belongs to my relatives to come into her household. And vice versa, you could say that in fact my relatives have the right to put somebody in that household. Now, of course, that's a very complicated thing because then somehow these personalities have to match, etc., etc. But anyway, that's the way. That's, let's say, a cultural convention. In the Songsarak context, it can actually mean that a man has at a certain moment 2 wives. In a Christian context, that is not an option, so they have made an adaptation to that and said, well, we cannot have like a double marriage, so we need a marriage context where we say, oh, then this person in fact is just living in the household, and then because there can only be a monogamous marriage. There are other ways in which that Niyam is being interpreted differently between Songsaraks and Christians. But indeed, what has always been striking to me is that when it comes to it, that Christians and Songsaraks are very well able to respect each other in terms of, this is what you guys are doing, this is what we are doing, we are all family. Now we have to respect each other's niyam, and we have to somehow, in that way, we can make things work. And that even though goes to just last week, in fact, one elder brother passed away, and the whole family went there. I wasn't there, but then later on I asked them, and they said, yeah, most of them are baptized, so they drink only tea, but we as Songsaraks, we go there and we have our rice beer. And that's perfectly acceptable to everybody.
Yeah, because when you talk about that, okay, among the Khasi, we also have Niyam Khasi, Niyam Tre. So Niyam in this case means religion. In your case, it's customary law, it's tradition, and it's all of that. And also there are some tension, there have been tension between traditional religion and Christianity here in this part.
Right.
But it seems out there that the fact that you are a Garo, the Garo-ness brings them together. What is that Garo-ness? Like, what is that?
I think
how would you define it actually?
I think it has to do with how your your kin group, your matrilineal kin group, defines who you are and the kind of loyalties and obligations which you have. And I think that for most people holds that you have. Your kin group is really very important, and the kin group is like, it brings a lot of obligations, but it also brings a lot of rights, and it basically defines your very much what you can do in life. And of course everybody has to negotiate that in their own way, right? There's also people who are resisting some of this stuff, quite a few, of course. But Garo-ness, I think, is very much about loyalty towards kin. And as I also write in the book, like one thing which is always very striking to me is that if two people meet in Garo Hills, then they need 3 questions, and then they know if they have to call each other uncle, nephew, father-in-law, right? So immediately we can basically place one another in terms of hierarchy, in terms of kin. Are we in-laws? Are we matrilineal relatives? So we can immediately do that, and that tracing is very inclusive. It means it's inclusive for whoever considers one another Garo. And one interesting element of that is that also allows for the inclusion of so-called outsiders. Yeah. So, I mean, there are Misos who marry into the Garo community who become, let's say, Chambugong Marak, and then they become included in a matrilineal kin group, which they were never born into, but which they came into by marriage or something like that.
Because in that sense, because in the book you did talk about it, right? Because there were attempts to actually define you as a Garo based on, you can only be a Garo if your mother and father are Garo, right? Yeah. There was a bill which will never be passed. True. It's not against custom, it's against customary law. So in that sense, you're saying that Garo-ness is very flexible, incorporates other groups, other people also, but then you have to follow the niyam, right?
Yeah, I think that's indeed the core thing. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think that historically there is. I think that let's say ethnic boundaries have always been very permeable, in the sense that people come in from outside, and you become Garo basically by following Garo niyam and by being loyal and adhering to the obligations which being part of the kin group brings to you. An Assamese carpenter who had come for house building, then he had fallen in love with a woman and he decided to settle there, and he became a farmer. There was a Nepali who had come from, I don't know how he came there, but he married, and everybody acknowledged him as basically a local. He spoke perfect Garo. He was given that, the kin title of his. In fact, why? No, I don't know how, but he was adopted in what way, but he got a Garo kin title somehow. So then it all starts to work. So in that sense, I think indeed that this codification is a response to, a current development where probably, I don't know, maybe a certain kind of anxiety or something like that. But I don't think there's a historical precedent for that. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, and also because there is no historical precedent, so such kind of legislations will not work in any way. But you also wrote about, like in terms of the district council, right, illegal institutions. Yet Garo niyam is also what guides the district council regarding relationships between people and land, as well as among one another. Right. So in a way, it's unwritten, it's very oral, and then district council is using that. How does that work? How does district council use its niyam to negotiate?
Yeah. Well, I guess that's a kind of that's indeed a challenge, and I think the district council is probably also struggling with that. Because it creates a lot of ground for negotiation, right, and interpretation. But I think that what has happened over the years is that there is a particular interpretation of what that niyam is. That is also what is sort of becomes part of. Which has become part of legislation. At the same time, that legislation can, of course, is then rigid in its own way, and it will be challenged. And that's also happening. And for all I know, there are cases of, for instance, where disputes about nokmaship, disputes about land, Some of them have been running for 20, 30 years. Because the district council also runs its own court, right? And these cases run for such a long time, I think in part because it is contested at the level of what people do locally, and then that somehow has to be brought in conversation with what's going on at that level of the council. So that's not an easy matter at all.
Yeah, I mean, the one example of the Niyam being flexible, basically about the trial of Nagon and Gansing, right? Where it's about this guy, one other person leaving their bulls and cows to roam freely and then destroying the field.
Right.
So that I felt like, so in that way, why Niyam is so oral? Because it's depend on situation and context, right?
Yeah.
So how can you codify that? If you codify that, doesn't you make it very mechanistic? Because then it loses its value. I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think also historically, in my understanding, let's say in the days when shifting cultivation was still, let's say, the dominant mode of farming, there was a season when cows could roam around freely, and that was the season when there were no crops on that jum field. But when people started to make more and more guebagan with these tender saplings growing there, it became a problem to have these cows roam around, because they would eat what were, to be the new tall trees. So indeed, that means that what is valid at one moment, or maybe even in one context, cannot be valid in the other one, right? Because then it becomes a problem. So there the conflict was about the fact that man was an elderly man. His cow had started to eat the saplings of another man. And then, of course, the elderly man who had left his cow roam freely said, well, it's your problem that you didn't fence your farmland, your orchard properly, right? Because otherwise my cow would not have eaten that. And this man whose trees were eaten said, but you should tie your cows, etc., like that kind of thing.
Yeah, because in that sense, when you talk about continuity, right? So this Niyam is a continuity.
Yes.
It was in the past, and how people have negotiated with the present and then change it accordingly, right? So in a way, the salvage anthropology, not doing that and looking at Niyam, I think it's a way how you have understood that. I would guess how things have continued. The continuity has been there from the past and the present.
Yeah, I think that the continuity is there from the past to the present, but the continuity is, and it's very much about ways of seeking consensus among one another and how one sort of negotiates that out. And I think that negotiating consensus is something which is pretty crucial, and it takes a lot of conversation, and it takes a lot of how do you say that? A lot of assessment. I mean, it's clearly that you have to be very involved with one another, and you have to be very connected to one another to sort of reach that kind of consensus. Yes.
I think we're almost at the end of the program now, but there is one question I'd like to ask you, maybe one of the last few ones. You observe in your book, right, relationships among houses depend on ties between women, but houses are nonetheless talked about with reference to the men who head them. So there is talking about matrilineity, and there's also talk about male authority. Right. Because there's something, I want to understand that more, like how is it that in matrilineal context, the male authority plays such an important role? What did you think about that? How do you understand that in the context of Garo?
Well, that's a very good question. Thank you for that one. I mean, of course, I think that historically, if you look at the literature, then matrilineity has often been misinterpreted as matriarchy. Yeah. So there was a famous book which was written by I think Italian or French journalist somewhere in the 1950s.
Where women rule.
Yeah, like the whatever mystical land where women rule, and then it's like this idea of the fact that in a Garo context, land is registered or in the name of females, right, in a female line, but at the same time, many authors have observed that, in fact, it's a very, in many ways, patriarchal society. It's a society where men have a lot to say, and in many ways also women can at times have the feeling that they're really dominated by men. But the way it works then is that land is registered in the name of women, property is registered in the name of women, and of course, that does give women more kind of negotiating power than, let's say, in patriarchal, well, as they would say in the Northeast, mainland India, right? Of course, there is more sort of weight which women have. At the same time, it is like the way in which households functions, and indeed in the book I talk about them as houses. I mean, maybe because I analyze in many ways the Garo society as a house society, comparable to the way in which house societies function in, for instance, in Southeast Asia, which maybe takes a bit too, I mean, maybe that's too much for now. And it's something which is explained in the book. But basically the idea is that houses, or households, you could say, are continued across generations, right? That's the core idea. So you have a household, and the household is continued over a longer period of time. And that the household is the carrier of assets, of property. That household is in the name of the woman. But if you have a marriage alliance, then from the side of, let's say, the men who marry into that house, there is also a kind of a right to basically co-constitute that household. The father, he would be replaced by one of his cousins, or basically other generations, so one of his nephews. So one of his nephews would come in, right? I mean, because of course it had to be somebody who is born in another family. And then he comes in, and then the idea is that in fact that nephew, or that matrilineage which that nephew belongs to, which the father also belongs to, they basically have a right to put their child there. And by doing that, they are co-constituting in fact that household. And that is what that marriage alliance is very much about. I don't know, I hope I can explain it, I explain it clearly enough.
No, I got it. And I think because also, like, see, we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
Otherwise, because I read this book and I learned a lot about Garo culture from this book, basically, which is something I didn't know before. Because, you know, like, sometimes we don't know about our own fellow community on the other side. So in this book, I believe, I mean, for those who would like to understand Garo culture, you know, Garo tradition, I think this book is must. You must read it, and especially in terms of what Erik has done, I think it's really great. And so the last question, because we want to talk more, but then there's no time left. What's the future plan? Is there another book coming? When is it coming? What theme are you working on?
Yeah, so I'm currently working on a research project which started last year, and which I'm really very excited about. And it's a comparative project which has 3 case studies. So we are comparing Sikkim, Western Meghalaya, that's Garo Hills, and Eastern Meghalaya, which is Jinja. And we're looking at the ways in which the relationship between people and environment, or people and nature, but more broadly speaking, people and environment, is changing over time. The work which I'm doing in the context of that project focuses very much on human, non-human relationships and how these are evolving. And in fact, I've just now spent about a month in Garo Hills, and I went to places where I've never been before, and I learned a lot about how, let's say, relationships to the non-human, how they are taking on new shapes in the now, in an environment which I would say in many ways is, I mean, you know, without sounding too dramatic, but is characterized by like a slow environmental crisis, because I think that that's what's going on, right? I mean, if we look at Garo Hills, what we see is a region which is in many ways like, you can't think about more places in the world which are more fertile and which are more blessed with a kind of variety of nature and wildlife and so on and so forth. And yet what we see is that forests are vanishing, wildlife is vanishing, and people are witnessing that, and they are concerned about that. Climate change is adding to all this. And in that context, we're basically I'm trying to research for Garo Hills, how is the relationship to that environment, how is that changing, and how is that environment not only consists of, let's say, or it certainly does not consist of dead rocks and dead trees and dead streams, but how is that also an environment which is alive, and how does that aliveness perhaps also present us with clues and ways in which this process of what is basically a process of reduction can be stopped and reversed. So that will be the next project, next book.
And hopefully that book comes out. Please come back to the channel. We'll love to have you again. And you wrote an article recently in Shillong Times, and I think you should write more, maybe once a month, because I think the voice from the Garo Hills, and the perspective is important. And I think it's very important to share with the world, right, what you have done. And viewers, thank you so much for being with us here today. And I thank Kong Farida for this wonderful place that she has given us for our program, Shari Loom Homestay. Those of you who are coming to Shillong, maybe you can stay here next time. And Erik, we'll meet you again. Thank you so much for our time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.